The day began like any other inside the busy interstellar terminal. People from many worlds moved around the wide hall, each of them rushing toward their own destination. There was noise everywhere, announcements echoing, luggage rolling on the shiny floor, voices mixing together. But in one quiet corner of the long waiting area, a young alien woman sat completely alone. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if she was trying to hold herself together. She had chosen the very end of a long bench, close to a window, where she could look out at the ships rising and landing. She liked watching the lights, the way each ship slowly came down as if it was breathing. It was the only thing that calmed her. She knew she looked nervous, and she was trying not to draw attention to herself. Her shoulders were slightly hunched. Her travel bag rested against her feet. Every few minutes she glanced around, as if checking if anyone was staring at her dot. Most people weren't. They were too busy with their own problems, their own plans, their own excitement. But some did notice her, and when they did, they chose not to sit beside her. She saw it again and again. Someone would walk by, look at the empty seat next to her, maybe slow down, think about sitting, then continue walking, as if they had suddenly remembered something important. Every time it happened, she felt a small sting inside her chest. She tried not to let it show on her face. It wasn't the first time she experienced this. It wasn't even the 100th. Ever since she had left her home world, this had become normal. People didn't always understand her species. They didn't know her culture. Most of all, they didn't know her. But the unknown made people uneasy, and she had learned that the safest thing to do was to stay quiet and hope the day passed smoothly. She looked down at her travel documents, checking them for the third time in the last hour. Her flight number, her boarding group, the time. She knew all of it by heart already, but she kept checking because it gave her something to do. Something to keep her mind away from the feeling of being alone in a crowd full of strangers. The announcement speakers crackled. A soft robotic voice said there would be a small delay because the crew needed extra time to prepare the cabin. Someone nearby sighed loudly in frustration. Someone else muttered that their whole schedule would be ruined now. She didn't react. Delays didn't bother her. She was used to waiting. Outside the large window, the sky had turned a deep blue shade, the kind that showed evening was coming. Tiny lights blinked on the edges of the landing platforms. Her eyes followed them, and she tried to imagine what it would feel like to arrive safely at her destination. She wasn't traveling for fun. She was traveling because she had to. She had left behind a difficult situation on her home planet, and now she was trying to build a new life somewhere far away. She told herself that this journey was important, that it would be worth everything she had endured so far. But sitting alone in that busy terminal, she felt small and uncertain. A group of travelers walked past her. They were chatting loudly, joking with each other, full of energy. One of them moved toward the seat next to her, but stopped the moment he noticed who was sitting there. He pulled back slightly, pretending he had just changed his mind, and sat 2 rows behind her instead. She didn't turn to look at him directly, but she caught his reflection in the window. It was a familiar sight, a familiar feeling. It wasn't anger she felt. It was something softer, something heavier, like tiredness mixed with acceptance. She lowered her head a little more. Minutes passed slowly. The terminal lights hummed quietly above her. People came and went. The seat beside her stayed empty, untouched, as if it belonged only to loneliness. Then something changed. Soft footsteps approached, not rushed, not heavy, not hesitant. Just steady, calm steps that stopped right near her bench. She didn't lift her head yet. She assumed someone else was about to look at the seat and then walk away like all the others. But instead of leaving, the person gently placed a small bag on the floor. Then, without hesitation or discomfort, they sat down on the empty seat right beside her. She froze for a moment, confused. She quickly turned her head, expecting to see someone lost or someone who hadn't realized who they were sitting next to. But what she found surprised her. The person who sat down was a human pilot. His uniform was neat, but looked like he had worn it for many hours already. There were faint creases on the sleeves, the kind that came from a long shift. His hair was slightly messy in a way that suggested he had taken off his flight cap not too long ago. There was a small tiredness in his eyes, but there was also warmth, their gentle, steady warmth. He didn't stare at her. He didn't seem bothered by her presence. He simply adjusted the strap of his bag and let out a soft breath, the kind people release when they finally sit after standing for too long. She blinked, unsure of what to do. People didn't sit next to her. Not unless they were forced to, but this human had chosen the seat. She waited, thinking maybe he would suddenly realize and move away. But he didn't. Instead, he looked in her direction briefly, gave a polite nod, and offered a small smile. Not a big smile, not one full of curiosity or judgment, just a natural, friendly smile like he would give anyone. She didn't know how to respond. Her hands tightened slightly around her travel documents. Her heart felt strange, like it didn't know whether to relax or to worry. She wasn't used to kindness coming this suddenly. More travelers passed by, and some even glanced curiously when they noticed a human pilot sitting comfortably beside her. But he didn't seem to notice the looks, or maybe he did notice, but didn't care. He seemed the kind of person who didn't rush to judge anyone. She opened her mouth slightly, thinking she should say something, but no words came out. Her throat felt dry, and her mind couldn't decide what the correct reaction was. Should she thank him? Should she pretend nothing happened? Should she move away? But before she could overthink it too much, the soft announcement voice returned, calling for a status update on the delayed flight. People around them groaned again. A pilot glanced toward the speakers, then back to his hands, and adjusted the watch on his wrist. She noticed something. He wasn't looking at her the way others did. There was no discomfort in his eyes. No fear, no hesitation, just a calm presence. She looked at the window again, pretending to be absorbed in the ship's outside. But inside her heart, something delicate shifted. This unexpected moment made her feel not invisible. And that alone was something she hadn't felt in a long time. A few more minutes passed. She could sense he wasn't in a hurry. The silence between them wasn't heavy or awkward. If anything, it felt lighter than the silence she usually lived in. Finally, she allowed herself to breathe more deeply. She loosened her grip on her documents. The edge of her anxiety softened just a little. The seat that had always been empty was now shared, and the world didn't fall apart. The people nearby didn't react dramatically. Everything continued normally, except for her heart, which felt slightly warm in a way she didn't know how to describe. She didn't speak to him yet. He didn't speak to her either. But his simple choice to sit beside her said something she had needed to hear for a long time. She didn't have to be alone all the time. And for the first time that day, she felt a small sense of comfort settling over her. Not enough to erase all her fears, but enough to remind her that moments of kindness still existed in the world, even in the middle of a busy terminal. Even for someone like her God, she kept watching the ships through the window, but now she wasn't watching them alone. And that quiet, simple moment, the soft sound of someone choosing to sit beside her, became the beginning of a story she never expected. The minutes after the pilot sat beside her felt strangely calm. She didn't understand why his presence made the air around her feel different. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, steady, quiet, not trying to take up too much space. Maybe it was the simple fact that he didn't seem uncomfortable sitting next to her. Or maybe it was because he hadn't looked at her with judgment, even for a second. She kept her eyes on the window, watching a small transport ship rise slowly into the sky. The lights from the landing platform reflected faintly on the glass. The world outside moved in a steady rhythm, while inside her chest, her heart still felt a little unsure. The pilot shifted slightly in his seat. She could sense it without looking at him. Not a restless movement, just a small adjustment, like someone finally relaxing after a long day. He placed his hands on his knees for a moment and rubbed his palms together gently, as if warming them. He looked tired, but not in a way that made him distant. More like someone who had spent many hours helping others. For a while, neither of them spoke. She wasn't used to talking to strangers, especially not humans. And he seemed comfortable with silence, so she didn't feel pressured to say anything. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It felt natural. Then, a soft bump from someone passing by brought her back into the moment. A traveler with too many bags brushed against the bench, muttered an apology, and hurried off. She flinched slightly out of habit. The pilot noticed the small movement. "You okay?" he asked gently. His voice was calm, not loud. It was the kind of voice someone used when they didn't want to scare or overwhelm. She turned to him slowly, surprised he had spoken to her directly. For a second, she didn't know how to answer. The words felt tangled in her throat, but she managed a small nod. He watched her for a moment, his expression relaxed. Then he gave a tiny smile, the kind that wasn't forced or polite, just a natural human smile. "Crowded place," he said softly. "Easy to get startled." She blinked. The way he spoke showed he wasn't trying to make conversation, just to fill the silence. He wasn't trying to pry into her life. He was simply checking on her. She nodded again, this time more real. The pilot leaned back slightly, letting his shoulders loosen. For a moment he didn't speak, giving her space to breathe. Then he said, "You waiting for the same delayed flight?" She hesitated. "Yes," she replied quietly. "Thought so," he said with a small lift of his brow. "Most people here are." She didn't know what to add, so she stayed silent. He didn't seem bothered by that. Instead, he looked around at the terminal. People were sitting in clusters on benches, leaning against walls, checking their bags, talking to their families. The pilot watched them with the eyes of someone who had spent years in airports, terminals, stations, someone who understood the way humans and aliens changed when they traveled. "You've got everything you need?" he asked after a moment. "Ticket ID. All that?" She nodded again, showing him the folded documents in her hands. "Good," he said, smiling slightly again. "First time traveling alone?" Her heart tightened for a moment. She wasn't used to sharing much about herself, especially with strangers. But something in his tone made her feel safe. Not pushed. "Just seen." "Yes," she said softly. "First time." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. "It's normal to be nervous. Happens to a lot of people." She lowered her eyes. "Not to many. Like me." He paused. She wasn't sure he understood what she meant. Most people didn't understand, but he did. She saw it in the small way his expression changed. Not pity, not discomfort. Just understanding. "There's all kinds of people in the galaxy," he said quietly. "Doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from. First time traveling alone can feel the same for anyone." His words were simple, but they didn't feel empty. For the first time since she had left her home world, someone was speaking to her like she was just another person trying to make her way through the galaxy. Not a stranger to avoid. Not a story others whispered about. Just a traveler. Just someone with a destination. She didn't know how to respond. She kept her eyes down, but she could feel her chest getting lighter, like a small weight had been lifted. The pilot glanced at the display board that showed flight details. The word "delayed" still flashed in bright letters. "You on your way to work?" "Family?" he asked softly. She hesitated again. She wasn't sure how much she should share, but something about him made her want to answer honestly. "Starting fresh," she said quietly. "A new place. A new beginning." He nodded slowly. "Good. New beginnings are good." His voice carried no judgment. No questions. Just acceptance. She felt a strange warmth growing inside her. She didn't know this human, and yet his few words made her feel something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. A small group of travelers walked by, talking loudly about connecting flights. When they passed her and the pilot, one of them looked at her for a moment, then at the pilot, confused. But the pilot didn't notice or didn't care. He continued calmly. Looking at the display board again, she noticed the difference. Immediately, most people would distance themselves if others stared. He didn't. He simply stayed where he was. She wanted to understand why. People usually avoided her. Pilots were respected, busy, often rushed. Why would one choose to sit beside her? After a moment, she gathered enough courage to speak. "You're not uncomfortable?" His eyebrows lifted slightly, as if the question surprised him. Then he gave another warm, relaxed smile. "Why would I be?" She looked down again. "People usually don't sit here. People worry too much," he said simply. "You're a traveler. I'm a traveler. That's all I need to know." The words settled inside her like a soft weight, comforting, grounding. No one had said something like that to her before. Not in that tone. Not with that much sincerity. He rested his elbows lightly on his knees. "I'm off duty," he added casually. "Had a long shift. Needed a seat. This one was open." He shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. The simple reason made her smile quietly, barely noticeable, but real. He wasn't trying to be heroic or dramatic. He wasn't doing anything complicated. He was just being a person who sat beside another person. She felt her breath ease for the first time since she had entered the terminal. A child somewhere behind them started laughing loudly, playing with a small light-up toy. A tired parent tried to quiet the child, but didn't succeed. The pilot chuckled softly at the noise. Long flights and kids. He murmured dot. She watched him for a second, the way his eyes softened at the sound. He wasn't irritated. He wasn't impatient. He simply understood the world around him, as if everything was part of life's normal rhythm. Finally, she asked something she had been curious about since he sat down. "You're not afraid of me?" He turned to her slowly, meeting her eyes with calm steadiness. "Should I be?" he asked gently. She shook her head quickly. "No. But some people act like they are." He tilted his head slightly, then gave a quiet sigh, not annoyed, not frustrated, just thoughtful. Fear usually comes from stories people hear, not from real people. She stared at him, letting the meaning settle. He wasn't afraid. He didn't avoid her. He didn't see her through old stories or stereotypes. He saw her, just her. A soft warmth spread through her chest again, stronger this time. She didn't know what to say next, so she didn't speak. But he didn't seem to mind. He wasn't expecting anything from her. That made her feel even safer. The delay announcement repeated. Some travelers stood to stretch their legs. Others groaned and complained. The pilot simply leaned back a little, crossing one ankle over the other, relaxing like he had all the time in the world. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. Without looking at her, she looked at him slowly. "What do you mean?" He smiled lightly. "You're here. You're traveling. You're moving forward. That's not easy. Most people never get that far." Her eyes softened. His words felt like a small light in a dark place. The terminal's large window reflected the two of them, sitting side by side, a lonely traveler who had been invisible for so long, and a tired pilot who saw her without hesitation dot in that reflection. Something felt different. She wasn't alone anymore. Not completely. And though they hadn't known each other for long, the moment he sat beside her had changed something inside her. It was small, fragile, but real, a spark of courage she didn't know. She still had Dot as the terminal lights flickered gently overhead and the noise of the crowd filled the air. She realized something important. A quiet act of kindness had the power to make the world feel a little less heavy. Dot and the soft way the human pilot had chosen the seat beside her was the beginning of a connection she never expected, but deeply needed. The delay stretched on, but somehow the time didn't feel as heavy as before. She had spent so many hours of her life sitting alone, pretending she was fine, pretending she didn't care about the empty seat beside her. But today was different. Today, the empty seat wasn't empty. A human pilot sat there quiet, calm, and unexpectedly kind. She felt the difference in the air, like the way a room changes when sunlight enters after a long night. She still felt nervous, still unsure of herself, but now there was something soft inside her chest, something warm. It confused her, but she didn't push it away. After a few quiet moments, the pilot spoke again, his voice gentle. "You look a little less tense now," he said with a small smile. She turned her head slightly. "Do I?" "A little," he replied. "When I sat down, you were holding your documents so tightly, I thought they might get crushed." She glanced at her hands, realizing she wasn't gripping anything anymore. Her fingers lay relaxed on her lap. She hadn't even noticed the change. "Travel is stressful," she murmured. "It can be," he said, "especially when you're doing it alone, especially when everything is new." His words carried no pressure, no expectations, just understanding. Dot, she felt her throat tighten slightly, not with fear this time, but with something like relief. For years, she had moved through crowds like a shadow, careful not to disturb anyone. She had learned to be small, silent, invisible. She never expected someone to notice her hands shaking, or the way she avoided eye contact, or the way she kept her breath short so people wouldn't feel bothered. But he noticed, and he wasn't annoyed by it. Dot, after a moment, she asked quietly, "You talk to everyone this way?" He chuckled softly. "Not everyone. Only the ones who look like they need a break." She looked away quickly, trying to hide the small smile threatening to form on her face. The pilot leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Long day for you?" he asked. Dot, she nodded. "Long few years, actually." He didn't comment, but something in his expression softened, like he understood more than she expected. She took a slow breath, feeling a strange courage building inside her. She wasn't someone who shared her past easily, but something about this moment made her feel safe enough to open a little door inside her heart. "I left home." "Not by choice," she said quietly. He turned his head gently toward her, not interrupting. "I didn't fit there," she continued. "My world is beautiful, but strict. Everything must be done the same way for generations. Everyone must follow certain paths. The way you talk, the way you dress, the way you work, everything is decided before you're even born." She paused to steady her breathing. "And I wasn't good at following those paths," she said softly. "I tried. I really tried. But every time I tried to act like everyone else, I felt like I was disappearing." The pilot listened with the focus of someone who understood what it meant for a person to speak their truth. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He let her continue at her own pace. "People began to whisper about me. They said I was strange, a problem, a mistake, a burden." She swallowed. "Some looked at me with fear, some with disappointment. I didn't know which was worse." Her voice grew quieter. "One day, someone told me I should leave, before I made things harder for everyone." She stopped speaking. The words still hurt, even after all this time. The pilot took a breath, slow and steady, before he responded. "That must have been hard," he said gently. She didn't trust herself to answer, so she just nodded. He shifted slightly, turning toward her more. "Want to know something?" he asked with a soft tone. She looked up at him, unsure. "Most people think pilots live perfect lives," he said. "They think we're always confident, always calm, always strong." He let out a quiet breath. "But we're not. Some of us became pilots because we were trying to escape something too." She blinked, surprised. He glanced at his hands, large, steady hands, but the way he moved them showed a small tremble of memory. "I left home when I was young," he said. "My life wasn't fitting me either. My family had plans for me that didn't feel like mine. So I left. It wasn't easy. People didn't approve. Some thought I was ruining my life." She listened closely. She hadn't expected him to share so openly. "But I found a place where I belonged," he continued. "It took time. A lot of mistakes. A lot of lonely days. But I found it." He looked at her with gentle conviction. "You will too." His words settled in her heart like warm light. She felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The terminal around them grew louder as more passengers moved through the waiting area. A large group of travelers from another world walked past, speaking in a melodic language. A vendor pushed a small cart filled with packaged meals, and the warm smell of food drifted through the air. A maintenance robot whirred quietly as it cleaned the floor. Life went on around them, but inside the simple bubble of their conversation, she felt a stillness that she hadn't experienced before. After a while, she asked softly, "Do you ever regret leaving?" The pilot thought about it seriously for a moment. Not rushing, not trying to impress her. "No," he said. "I regret waiting so long. I regret thinking I wasn't allowed to choose my own life." She lowered her eyes. His words struck something deep inside her. "You're allowed to choose yours," he added gently, "even if others don't understand." She exhaled, a small shaky breath escaping her chest. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it. A soft chime echoed through the terminal. People turned their heads, thinking it might be the boarding call, but the speakers announced another small delay. A few travelers groaned. Someone near them said something under their breath, but she didn't care about the delay anymore. Not now. She turned slightly to look at the pilot again. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, his presence steady like a quiet anchor. The world felt a little less cold beside him. "Thank you," she said softly. He gave a gentle shrug. "For what?" "For talking to me." He smiled. "That's easy." "It's not easy for everyone," she said quietly. "You make it feel normal." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because it is normal. You deserve to be talked to like a person. Because you are one." Her eyes burned for a second. Not with tears exactly, but with a feeling she wasn't used to, a feeling of being understood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It felt like a blanket resting lightly on their shoulders. The pilot broke the silence after a while with a gentle question. "Where does your journey take you?" She looked down at her hands. "A small colony world," she said. "It's quiet. They say new arrivals can start fresh there. Work, build a life, become part of a community." "Sounds peaceful," he said. "I hope so," she whispered. "You'll do well there." His voice carried quiet certainty. "I can tell. You don't even know me," she said, half smiling, half unbelieving. "I know enough," he answered. "You're brave." Her eyes widened slightly. "I'm not brave." "You left everything familiar," he said. "You stepped into the unknown. You're sitting in a huge terminal surrounded by strangers, and you're still moving forward. That's bravery. She felt her throat tighten again. No one had ever called her brave before. The pilot leaned back, letting his gaze drift toward the large window. Ships continued to rise and land, lights flickering softly in the fading evening. The sky outside was a deep, peaceful blue. She watched him for a moment, his calm breathing, his relaxed shoulders, his steady presence, and realized something quietly powerful. She wasn't afraid of him. And more importantly, she didn't feel lesser anymore, because someone finally chose to sit beside her. Someone saw her without hesitation. Someone listened. The moment stretched softly between them, warm and unhurried. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if it was only a small bench in a crowded terminal, next to a stranger who treated her like a person. A soft part of her heart opened. Like a gentle flower seeing sunlight after years of shade. She didn't know what the next hours would bring. She didn't know what her new life would look like. But she knew one thing. This conversation was changing her. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking into the future alone. The next morning started with a strange calmness, the kind that comes after a storm, but before the next one arrives. He woke up earlier than usual, not because he felt fresh, but because his mind refused to rest. Even though his eyes were open, it felt like he was still stuck somewhere between yesterday's chaos and whatever was waiting for him today. The sun outside was soft and pale, the kind of light that makes everything look peaceful even if nothing truly is. He sat at the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands over his face, trying to shake off the heaviness he had been carrying for days. There were too many questions and not enough answers. Too many emotions and nowhere to put them. He stepped outside and found the house unnervingly quiet. No humming, no footsteps, no small movements. Just silence. A part of him appreciated the quiet, but another part felt uneasy. He had gotten used to constant tension. Now silence felt suspicious. He walked towards the kitchen, expecting to see her sitting at the small wooden table like she usually did, but the chair was empty. The morning air felt colder than it should. For a second, he wondered if she had left again without saying anything. It was something she had done before when she felt overwhelmed. But there was a cup placed neatly near the sink, still warm inside. She had been here recently. He moved to the back door and stepped out. That's when he saw her. She was standing near the old tree, the one that leaned slightly to the right, as if it was always listening to the wind. She stood perfectly still, hands loosely by her side, watching the horizon. She looked calm, but he knew her well enough to see the stiffness in her shoulders. Something was bothering her. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt whatever thoughts she was fighting. When she finally turned to him, she gave a small smile, not the big, bright one she used to have, but the soft kind people use when they're tired, but trying not to show it. He asked her if she had slept. She nodded, but her eyes told the truth she hadn't. They stood there quietly. No one rushed to fill the silence. Sometimes silence says more than words. After a while, she finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost careful, as if she was still deciding whether she should say anything at all. She said she needed to tell him something important, something she had been hiding, because she didn't know how he would react. His heart tightened. Every important conversation these days felt like walking on a thin rope. But he told her to say it anyway. Whatever it was, he wanted honesty more than anything. She took a deep breath and began explaining. Her words were slow, but each sentence carried weight. She said she had been scared, not of him, but of how quickly things were changing around them. She felt like everything was shifting too fast, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to keep moving forward. He listened without interrupting, even when some parts stung more than he expected. She said she didn't want to lose him, but she also didn't want to hold him back. She wasn't perfect. She knew she made mistakes. She knew she caused trouble. She knew she was complicated. But she also said that she cared about him more than she had cared about anyone in a long time. That last sentence hit him the hardest. He didn't reply right away. He thought about everything they had gone through, the misunderstandings, the late-night arguments, the strange situations, the moments of unexpected peace. He realized that yes, it had been difficult, but there had also been something real between them, something worth holding on to. He stepped closer and told her that he wasn't perfect either. He wasn't some strong, fearless person who knew exactly what to do all the time. He was just trying his best, just like she was. He admitted that some days he felt lost too. He told her that being scared didn't mean she was weak. She looked down at the ground when he said that, as if she didn't believe him. So he gently lifted her chin and made her meet his eyes. He repeated the same words, slower this time, so she would know he meant them. For a few seconds she didn't react, but then her shoulders relaxed. A small part of the tension inside her faded. They walked back toward the house together. Not hand in hand, not dramatically just side by side, close enough to remind themselves they weren't alone. He made tea for both of them, trying to bring back even a tiny sense of normal routine. She sat across from him, finally looking a little more at ease. While they sipped their tea, he told her something he hadn't shared before. He explained how he had been stressed too, how he had been thinking about every decision, wondering if he was doing the right thing. He confessed that sometimes he felt like he wasn't enough. She looked surprised, maybe because she always saw him as the steady one. But hearing that made her feel understood. She wasn't the only one dealing with fear. Their conversation softened after that. They didn't argue. They didn't try to convince each other of anything. And they didn't rush solutions. They just talked honestly, openly, calmly. For the first time in days, it felt like they were on the same side. Later in the afternoon, they decided to take a walk. The weather was gentle and cool, and the open air seemed to lift some weight off their minds. They didn't say much during the walk, but they didn't need to. Sometimes being near someone is enough. At one point, she stopped to look at some small stones beside the path, the same stones she had collected on her first day here. She said she kept them because they made her feel grounded. He didn't laugh or tease her. Instead, he told her that everyone needs something small to hold on to. That made her smile a little. When they reached back home, he noticed she finally looked less tense. Not fully okay, but definitely better than she had in the morning. He felt relieved. In the evening, she helped him prepare dinner, and even though she wasn't very skilled, he didn't mind. She chopped vegetables unevenly, spilled water twice, and kept asking questions about every tiny step. But instead of getting annoyed, he found it strangely comforting. It felt like life, messy, imperfect, but still warm. After dinner, they sat outside and watched the sky slowly fade from orange to deep blue. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, not out of weakness, but out of comfort. He didn't move or say anything. He simply let her be there. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful, safe. She quietly thanked him, not for the dinner, not for the walk, but for staying, for trying, for not giving up when things became difficult. He told her he wasn't going anywhere. The night breeze was cool and soft. The moon was bright but gentle. It felt like the world had paused just long enough for them to breathe again. They didn't know what challenges were coming next. They didn't know if everything would be easy from here. But they did know one thing: they were willing to face it together. And that alone made everything feel a little less heavy. By the time they returned inside, something had changed between them. Something small but important. A quiet understanding. A shared strength. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a real one. And sometimes, real is more powerful than perfect.